What is Gekiga? In simple terms, Gekiga is a maturation of comics in Japan, one of many trees that have grown from the seeds planted from comics, cementing itself into post-war Japan. A mode of comics that would offer more literary, political, experimental, and biographical approaches than what would typically be published for children. But even being a movement rooted in experimentation and expansion of the medium, it still fell victim to existing within social conventions and, specifically, conventions of gender. And thus, the space to innovate mostly meant it was a space for men to innovate. This was a time in manga where women cartoonists pretty much only had the options to stay within the bounds of what was acceptable for the established style of girl comics, or worked solely in supportive roles. A long shot from the now, where we can now be blessed with artists like Hiromu Arakawa or Q Hayashida, who can create massive successes outside the nebulous and vague but restrictive confines of girls' comics. But within the peak of Gekiga, inside the pages of Garo, a magazine created with the mission statement to make comics outside of the editorial edict commonly found in mass-market comic magazines, a stepping stone in changing these assumptions and the kinds of comics women could make, would make herself known, a cartoonist whose work should be widely discussed, not only for what she represents to feminist analysis of comic history, but for her experimentation and how much she pushed the medium to new places. Kuniko Tsurita, for as long as I've known about her, has struck me as a person without a movement, a bookish child of fishermen feasting on a wide diet of boys manga, genre fiction, and art history, witnessing the Tokyo bohemian youth in the midst of changing youth culture and the political unrest of student Vietnam War protests from afar, speeding through motorcycle rides even when the experience might have killed her, and going alone to be the only woman in the erotic film theater for some kind of research. Always existing outside the expectation of what a woman her age should or would be doing. Over the course of her career, nearly 20 full years from her debut in Garo at 18 in 1965 to her death at 37 in 1985, Tsurita lived and observed life from many angles, and the body of work she left behind encapsulates that. Tsurita has her share of stories that lend themselves to the feminist lens. Woman and My Wife is an Acrobat come to mind, but neither feel clear-cut in the message. Woman is mostly void of dialogue and showcases its tale of a mother's life and misfortune through abstract images and inventive paneling that fill the burdens of the protagonist with emotional weight that does not require words. There is a lingering sadness as time progresses through the story and we feel every punch of rejection and dismissal that women feel once our assigned roles in life are determined to have been fulfilled. My Wife is an Acrobat, on the other hand, reminds me a lot of the anecdote of Tsurita going to erotic film theaters for research, as we start with an act of voyeurism, a man looking into a peephole at a woman contorting herself into various shapes, akin to the way a woman might be expected to perform herself into sexy shapes in erotic films. Eventually, the woman transforms into a circus ringleader, becoming a parody of performance before taking on the image of a corpse and beckoning her lover to come see her. It does not beg for a literal interpretation, registering to me more like a showcase of the roadmap of performance for women, sexy and enticing, before becoming a self-parody itself, or dying out entirely. A short, abstract glance at how futile it can be to style herself into the perfect patriarchal woman. But this angle of Tsurita's storytelling is only one of many that she has up her sleeve. Mr. Jinroku strikes me as an apt example of one of her stories that feels like it goes against what was expected of so-called women's comics. It follows a group of snobby, scruffy men who sneer at art and wander around drinking and living aimlessly until things around them die, or they themselves die. It is a tale of cynical slackers who aim their anger at anyone who decided to do, well, anything. It is extremely in line with Gekiga, which often did focus on men who were very down on their luck and nihilistic, feeling like Tsurita really just came in and made the stories she wanted. If she wanted to make a comic reflecting her experiences as a woman, she would. If she wanted to make a comic typical of what men making Gekiga comics would make, she would. And so for the rest of her life, she did. But sadly, she did not have a lot of time left to live as long as she should have, and certainly not long enough to see the impact of her work or the women that came after her, which leads to the most ever-present theme in Tsurita's work: death. Long before Tsurita was diagnosed with the lupus that would eventually take her life, death was littered through her work. Early on, this feeling of death is treated with more levity or irony, even if still unpleasant. It is the cycle of political murders with questionable intent backlit by lazy days of nonsense. The cruel auteur of Anti, who uses the misfortune of others to amplify his own art. It's a repeated punchline of sorts in Mr. Jinroku, but as her stories progress, it feels like death is something that gets closer to her, and us by extension of reading. Calamity feels like a massive turning point in this as we follow a prisoner adamant in her innocence, but is faced with an impending death sentence that refuses to be overruled, leaving us with a much more harrowing final page, reckoning with death than in a final page like Mr. Jinroku's. No longer is death happenstance, but something we are knowingly thrust into, no irony left within this cruelty. This feeling reverberates in Yuko's Days, a suffocating, dreamy story that fills in almost all of its white space with oppressive darkness that amplifies its cramped hospital setting. Even beams of light here aim only to highlight the shadows that the story soaks in. Explicitly referencing lupus itself, this tale feels reflective of one of the darkest parts of sickness and death, capturing the haze that sickness gives you as the world around the protagonist swirls into violent storms, and the outside view of cities becomes flooded with a violent body of water filling the sky. Yuko's respite of a beautiful view reminding her that the world continues to turn has drowned and been shrouded by the fear of the hospital being at the end of her life. It is maybe Tsurita's most bleak story and is deeply sad to read. But a concept as persistent as death can never be encompassed by just one emotion. And if Tsurita's works shows anything, it is that she had a vast range of perspective to write from, and her range in facing death is showcased in the namesake centerpiece of her English collection, The Sky is Blue with a Single Cloud. A small, impacting story that wraps together a lot of complicated, contrasting feelings and images in its short amount of pages. We follow a protagonist with wide eyes filled with either horror or wonder as she navigates a beautiful day where no one is to be found. As she rides her motorcycle across a vast landscape, she witnesses a massive cloud blooming from the distance. The shape of an apocalyptic mushroom cloud, a signal of mass death and destruction surrounded by the dreamlike beauty of the wonderful sky. It carries harrowing implications, but the story itself traps you in this peaceful, dreamlike state. There is no urgency to the devastation. It drifts past you over the sky. It takes the heaviness of death and it reminds you that when you leave your body, when everyone does, you become boundless. There is a comfort to all that keeps you weighted onto earth, which makes death scary and creates all the heavy, dark feelings explored in previous stories. But once it is all gone, you can become a single cloud in the sky forever. Tsurita's fixation on the sky in her work would continue on through the end of her career. Light, for one, features a romance story about a woman who falls in love with a pilot who makes a promise to his love to descend from the sky with an engagement ring before vanishing in a stormy sky, leaving his love to look to the sky day to day with hope that she will see him once more. Presenting the sky with a certain duality, its beautiful peacefulness inspiring hope that can quickly fill in and bring death. We can view the sky as aspirational and reach towards it, but our entry is denied. This exact theme is explored in The Sea Snake and The Big Dipper, a story that is something of a stylistic departure for Tsurita's comics. A narration-filled tale with big, elaborate, evocative panels, eschewing dialogue, and a lot of the traditional comic making of stories past. This one is about a mermaid-like serpent woman residing in the deepest, darkest parts of the sea, and begins to feel suffocated, and upon learning of the sky and stars, strives to swim to the most northern part of the world, aiming to join the sky and meet the closest star. But instead, her entry to the sky is denied, and she freezes. This and the stormy, life-taking sky of flight feel like they loop in thematically with the final visage of endless storm outside of the hospital of Yuko's Days. And given what that story does, I think we can glimpse something that was marinating in Tsurita's headspace. Yuko's Days explores the sickness-driven fear that we will never be anything beyond the hospital, and that it is all filled in with storms above and below. The beautiful, often calming sky and sea turning hostile, keeping one from indulging in their peace, and bringing death time and time again. The death of the sea snake, the death of the pilot, and even the disappearance of all life in Sky is Blue. And yet it is still beautiful, calming, aspirational. Life and death each with their own fair share of weightless calm and heaviness, complicated and multifaceted, like Tsurita was, like we all are, like sickness and life and death all are. This is far from a completely comprehensive analysis or deep dive into Tsurita's life and work. Much of her work still remains untranslated even today, but I've felt passionately about these stories and what they mean to me, what they could have meant to Tsurita, and what Tsurita means to comics on large. There is still not a lot of coverage of her work past the select few who have taken it upon themselves, and so here I aim to just be one more small voice to hopefully inspire another yet to read her work and perhaps write a few words about it, like I have been inspired to. So thank you to those before me, to you, and to everyone after. Hello, editing Lila here, and welcome to me getting more usage out of my sky footage. Thank you for watching, if you watched this far. I wanted to get this one out much earlier, but one, I decided I would shoot sky footage in the middle of winter when I started production on this, which was not the wisest choice in hindsight. And then also, it got delayed because I got sick, and it is hard to write while sick. Um, but I'm here for reasons other than explanations for video absence. And that is one, I would like to give a special thanks to this video to Ryan Holmberg, who is the translator and essayist, historian, manga historian guy who worked on the English Tsurita collection, as well as Seiichi Hayashi's Red Colored Elegy and Man Without Talent by Suge. His essays in all three of those books helped inform this analysis, and his work is irreplaceable and does makes a video like this even really possible. So thank you. And secondly, I would like to give a special shout out to my first patron, Starfall Blossom. Hello, Starfall Blossom. Thank you. Um, on my Patreon, I post more immediate stuff. Like I have a video about my favorite reads of 2025, going through that. And I'm working on first impressions for DC's Vertigo line, doing little batches of how I feel about the line as it progresses. So stuff that's like a little bit less scripted, more immediate thoughts, as well as my full videos in general and uncensored versions of my videos if I, for when I choose to make stuff that is less YouTube friendly. But that is all for me from now. Thank you, and till next time.